K9, Dog Bites, Nanny, at breakfast. What they found in baby's food shocked all. The morning in Willow Bend was the kind that made people believe nothing bad could ever happen. Sunlight spilled in through the kitchen window, soft and golden, painting the tiled floor in warm squares. The kettle whistled faintly on the stove, and the smell of cinnamon and bananas drifted from the bowl of oatmeal cooling on the high-chair tray. Anthony Cole, broad-shouldered and weary-eyed, leaned back against the counter with his coffee. For a moment, the world seemed almost normal. Just a father, his 2-year-old daughter, and the dog stretched out on the rug by the fridge. Naomi swung her little legs against the high chair, giggling at the steam rising from her breakfast. Her curls stuck to her forehead, and she clapped when Sophie, the nanny, lifted the spoon. Sophie's voice was low, gentle, almost a whisper. "Here we go, sweetheart. One more bite." Buzz, the German shepherd, lay perfectly still, his amber eyes following every motion. His chest rose and fell with the rhythm of patience, but the muscles along his shoulders quivered. 6 months had passed with Sophie in this house, yet never once had Buzz offered her his trust. Anthony had joked about it before. An old soldier's instinct, he'd said, brushing it off. The spoon hovered, oatmeal glistening in the morning light. Naomi opened her mouth, and then the peace shattered. With a sudden guttural snarl, Buzz surged to his feet. The kitchen chair scraped back violently as the 100-pound dog lunged. His teeth clamped onto Sophie's forearm with terrifying precision. The bowl clattered, the spoon spun across the floor, and Naomi's delighted giggle collapsed into a shrill, terrified wail. Sophie screamed high and sharp, trying to wrench her arm free. "He's gone mad!" she shrieked. Anthony's mug shattered on the counter as he roared, "Buzz, out!" Obedient even in fury, the shepherd released instantly, retreating to the rug with his body trembling. The kitchen fell into stunned silence except for Naomi's sobs. Sophie clutched her bleeding arm, her face contorted in outrage. Anthony's heart thundered, but his gaze wasn't on her. It was on Buzz, because the dog wasn't watching Sophie anymore. He was staring at the spoon lying on the tiles, its metal coated with a faint pink smear. Willow Bend woke slowly, the way river towns do when the water runs smooth and the wind carries birdsong from the cottonwoods. Cottages with peeling porches and tidy gardens lined the quiet streets. American flags hung faded at the edges but clean, and chalk hopscotch grids waited on driveways like invitations to summer. On Willow Street, the Cole house sat at the bend. White clapboard, blue shutters, a swing that creaked when the afternoon breeze came down from the hills. It wasn't much, but it was sturdy. It was the kind of place where a person could try to heal. Inside, routine kept the days stitched together. Anthony rose before dawn, not because an alarm demanded it, but because his body remembered watch rotations and barracks lights. He brewed coffee with the same care he'd once used to field strip a rifle, checked doors and windows out of habit, then stood at the back door for a minute, just listening. When you've seen nights go wrong in 100 different ways, quiet becomes its own prayer. He had been a squad leader once, 8 men who trusted his voice in the noise. The desert had taught him to count breaths when panic came, 4 in, 4 held, 4 out. The army had taught him how to act when others froze. Love had taught him how to be still. Naomi had done that, arriving 2 springs ago with a fistful of dark curls and a noise like a sparrow. Her mother had left before Naomi's first birthday, a parting so neat and bloodless it left no visible seam and every hidden wound. Anthony did not talk about it to neighbors. He saved his words for his daughter and for Buzz. Buzz was 5 and carried himself like a veteran. The shepherd's coat ran black along the spine and gold down the sides, a saddle of shadow over muscle tuned by years of work. He bore a thin scar where hair refused to grow, a pale crescent just behind his left shoulder from the night a suspect's knife had found flesh instead of Kevlar. His hips showed the near-invisible stiffness of a dog trained to vault walls and leap fences, and now forced to practice patience around a toddler who sometimes mistook ears for handles. He had commands in 2 languages and obeyed hand signals as if thought itself had teeth. But his greatest skill was the one that never earned a ribbon, the way he watched Naomi, not possessive, not anxious, just present. When she tottered across the living room with a sippy cup, Buzz angled his body to shadow her path. When she caught a cold in February and coughed until dawn, he curled so close her little back rose and fell against his flank as if borrowing his breath. He accepted dress-up tiaras and sticker crowns without blinking. If the front doorbell rang, he was at Anthony's knee in an instant, the switch from play to protection as invisible as a blade sliding out of a sheath. Sophie came to them in winter, when Anthony finally admitted he could not be 2 people at once, a man who brought home paychecks and a man who never let his daughter cry alone. She had sturdy references and a soft voice, the kind of calm that makes doctors' offices and bedtime battles feel survivable. She said she'd grown up helping with younger cousins and had a way with fussy babies. At 32, she wore her dark hair pulled neatly back, and her hands moved with unhurried efficiency through laundry baskets and rinsed bottles. In those first weeks, the house exhaled. Anthony's tools stopped gathering dust at the shop he'd opened with a friend. Naomi learned to say, Sophie, and brought her blocks for structures Sophie always managed to make symmetrical. The pediatrician's receptionist complimented Sophie's organized bag: wipes, snacks, insurance card, a tiny thermometer that beeped like a sparrow. Neighbors waved when she pushed the stroller past. If anyone noticed the way Buzz hung back when Sophie entered a room, they chalked it up to the oddities of dogs and carried on with their day. Yet Buzz never quite softened. He would accept treats from her palm and ignore them once they hit the floor. He would lie down on command, but keep his eyes open. When Sophie trimmed Naomi's nails, he watched from the doorway with the stillness of a coiled rope. Anthony noticed. He told himself it was old training rubbing against a new life. He told himself loyalty sometimes takes its time when it must be transferred from uniform to hearth. He told himself a dozen plausible things and none that quieted the prickle at the base of his neck. The kitchen became their shared terrain. Morning light, like the room, found the lines in the butcher block counter and the pale nicks in the oak table gleamed on the chrome of the high chair. Sophie favored oatmeal for Naomi, oats cooked soft, banana mashed smooth, a dusting of cinnamon that turned the air warm and forgiving. She hummed when she stirred, tunes that sounded familiar but never resolved into songs Anthony could name. She handed Anthony grocery lists on index cards with tidy block letters. He found himself grateful for the order she brought, even when the edges of it felt exacting. Some days, Anthony arrived home to find Naomi asleep on the rug. Buzz stretched the length of her like a living guardrail, and Sophie rinsing bowls at the sink, her sleeves rolled neatly to the elbow, her phone face down on the windowsill. Other days, he caught the tail end of tension, that slight clamp in Naomi's jaw, the set of Sophie's mouth too polite to be anything but forced. "Just a little fussy," she would say lightly. "She likes her spoon a certain way." Anthony would nod, because 2-year-olds are mysterious and spoons are battlegrounds, and he was not a man who saw ghosts where none existed. But ghosts sometimes live in the space between moments. The way Sophie's hand lingered on Naomi's shoulder a beat too long, the way her smile didn't reach her eyes when Buzz entered the room, the way she washed the toddler bowls twice, then once more for luck, as if trying to rinse away something not on the plastic but beneath it. The way Buzz's gaze tracked her, not aggressive, not fearful, simply measuring. At the shop, Anthony's partner liked to say that machines don't lie. If a truck drags left, there's a reason. If a fan belt squeals at startup, it's telling you something. People, though, people were messier. Anthony had built a life around the assumption that character reveals itself under pressure. He believed in the math of behavior. Add duty and love, subtract fear, multiply by time, and you'd get the truth. He did not yet know the equation had already begun to solve itself in his kitchen. Neighbors knew the broad strokes of the Cole household, the single dad who never missed a daycare pickup, the shepherd with the soldier's posture, the nanny with the calm voice. When Buzz barked at delivery men, Anthony apologized. When Naomi shrieked with laughter in the yard, Anthony made sure it stayed laughter. When Sophie texted to say they were out of milk, he stopped on the way home and bought 2 gallons, because little things add up to a day that doesn't collapse before bedtime. In the evenings, after Naomi slept, Anthony would sit on the back steps with Buzz and let the night talk to them. The shiver of leaves, the distant whine of a train, the low murmur of televisions behind drawn curtains. Sometimes he spoke softly to the dog, words he didn't plan. "We're okay, aren't we? We're good." Buzz would lean his shoulder into Anthony's knee, a weight that felt like an answer. The morning it all detonated looked no different than the others that had come before, and perhaps that is why it hurt as much as it did. Tragedy rarely announces itself with a drum roll. It glides in on a golden shaft of light, on the steam from a kettle, on the lift of a spoon. It arrives while you are busy believing you are safe. And when it does, you will either be the man who ignores the dog or the man who finally asks why the dog is staring at a spoon. Anthony Cole had lived long enough to know that trust was never given freely. It was built, tested, and sometimes betrayed. In war, you trusted the man who covered your flank not because you liked him, but because he had proven he would not falter when bullets cracked the air. In life after war, Anthony was learning trust was messier. It involved babysitters, grocery lists, and the fragile peace of a child's laughter. At first, Sophie had seemed like a gift. She arrived when Anthony was drowning in the math of single fatherhood, balancing shifts at the auto shop, bills, and Naomi's endless needs. Sophie slid into the rhythm of the household with practiced ease. She knew how to coax Naomi to sleep with a lullaby hummed off-key but gentle, how to fold laundry into precise stacks, how to warm bottles at just the right temperature. For 6 months, she became the scaffolding holding Anthony's days upright. And yet, Buzz never let her all the way in. It wasn't outright hostility. Buzz did not snap or snarl, never broke the rules drilled into him during his years as a K9, but his eyes told the story, sharp, amber, unwavering. When Sophie entered a room, his head would lift. When she bent close to Naomi, his ears pricked forward. If she laughed too loudly, his tail went stiff. Anthony noticed, of course. How could he not? But he told himself stories to explain it away. Dogs are creatures of habit. Buzz missed the old routines. He was protective to a fault. Besides, Anthony was grateful. Sophie gave him hours of breathing room he hadn't had since Naomi's birth. Gratitude has a way of dulling instincts, even those trained in fire. Naomi, though, offered her own silent commentary. She adored Buzz, climbed onto his back like he was a furry mountain, fell asleep in the crook of his belly, whispered toddler secrets into his ears. With Sophie, her affection was different. She obeyed, but there was hesitation. The way she pressed her lips tight when Sophie fed her, the way she turned her face away at bedtime kisses. Nothing Anthony could put his finger on, but the subtle difference gnawed at him late at night. One Saturday morning, the unease crystallized. Sophie prepared Naomi's oatmeal while Anthony fixed a leaky faucet in the sink. Buzz lay by the fridge, eyes half closed, but watching. Sophie stirred the bowl, humming a tune that didn't quite resolve, then offered the spoon. Naomi turned her head stubbornly, lips sealed. Buzz stood, slowly, deliberately. "Down, boy," Anthony said lightly, but the command came out thinner than he meant it. Buzz didn't move closer, but his gaze locked on the spoon. His ears flattened slightly, as if bracing for something Anthony could not see. Sophie forced a laugh. "She's fussy today." She withdrew the spoon, scraped the oatmeal back into the bowl, then held it out again. "Come on, sweet pea." Naomi glanced at Buzz before finally taking the bite. Anthony told himself it was nothing, but he found himself watching too. That evening, after Naomi was asleep, Anthony sat on the back steps with Buzz at his side. The night air smelled of pine and motor oil clinging to his jacket. He scratched behind Buzz's ears, feeling the tension thrumming beneath the fur. "What is it, boy?" he murmured. "What do you see that I don't?" Buzz leaned against him, a living weight, and gave no answer except the steady thump of his tail against the step. The days that followed carried the same pattern. Sophie efficient, Naomi compliant, Buzz unsettled. The air inside the coal house grew taut, a violin string waiting for the bow. Anthony told himself not to be paranoid, but the soldier in him, the man who had once trusted instinct to survive, couldn't stop listening to the silence between moments. It was in that silence that the first crack appeared, and it was in that silence that Anthony began to realize trust, once again, might cost more than he was willing to pay. The past never left quietly. It lingered like smoke on Anthony Cole's skin. Even in the quiet rhythms of Willow Bend, he sometimes woke drenched in sweat, half expecting the rattle of gunfire or the metallic tang of sand in his mouth. Buzz, always near, would rest his head on the side of the bed until Anthony's breathing evened, a silent sentinel who needed no words. It was that bond, tempered in combat, sealed by scars, that made Anthony trust his dog more than most people. Buzz had been there in Kandahar, when the convoy had hit the IED. The blast had flipped a Humvee, the world a rolling fireball of shrapnel and dust. Buzz had gone in after the driver, ignoring flames, dragging him free by the vest. Anthony never forgot the sight, a German shepherd dragging a full-grown man, teeth clenched, body burning with determination. Later, in the field hospital, when Anthony's own leg was stitched after flying debris cut deep, he saw Buzz under anesthesia with staples in his shoulder. 2 soldiers scarred on the same night. 2 soldiers who kept walking anyway. That night would come back to him years later, unbidden, as he sat at his kitchen table watching Sophie feed Naomi. She seemed perfect, too perfect. The careful way she cut Naomi's food, the soft hum of lullabies, the polite smile when neighbors complimented her patience. But perfection, Anthony knew, was often camouflage. In the Army, it was the guy who volunteered too often, the one who smiled too easily, until pressure stripped away the mask. Buzz never bought the mask. He paced when Sophie lingered, he stiffened when she bent too close, and Naomi, though obedient, seemed smaller in Sophie's arms than in Anthony's or Buzz's shadow. One afternoon, while fixing a carburetor in the shop, Anthony caught himself replaying the image of Buzz's eyes on Sophie. They weren't angry. They weren't fearful. They were assessing, like a soldier staring down the barrel of a rifle, waiting for the shot that might come. That evening, Anthony pulled out the family photo album. Naomi had been only a year old when her mother left. A clean break, no forwarding address. Anthony had never spoken much about it, even to himself. But when he turned the pages, Naomi in her first Halloween costume, Naomi asleep against Buzz's side, he felt the gnaw of failure. He had promised his little girl safety, and safety was beginning to feel fragile in ways he could not name. Then came the first odd slip from Sophie. It was subtle. She mixed up Naomi's birth date while chatting with a neighbor. Another day, she arrived late, claiming the bus had broken down, but Anthony noticed her shoes were dry despite the afternoon rain. Once, while Naomi napped, he found Sophie standing at the kitchen window staring into the backyard, her lips moving as if whispering to someone unseen. When she realized he was there, she startled violently, then laughed it off. Anthony wanted to dismiss it. God knows he wanted the help, the order Sophie provided, but Buzz wouldn't let him. The dog's vigilance grew sharper. He barked at night when Sophie slipped in the back door late after running errands. He blocked the hallway once, chest rigid, when she tried to carry Naomi upstairs. Anthony reprimanded him, embarrassed, but he didn't miss how Buzz's ears stayed locked forward, eyes unblinking. The memories came back sharper now, colliding with the present. He remembered his father, a logger who drank too hard and shouted too much, telling him once, "A dog doesn't lie. If it growls, there's a reason." At the time, Anthony had rolled his teenage eyes. Now, with Naomi's life in his arms, the words felt like scripture. The real fracture came one rainy morning in October. Naomi had been sick with a mild fever. Sophie insisted she would handle breakfast. Anthony stood in the doorway sipping coffee, trying to convince himself to relax. Buzz lay at his usual post by the fridge. Naomi whined, pushing the spoon away. Sophie's smile didn't falter, but her voice slipped sharp. "Don't be difficult." She pressed the spoon closer. Buzz lifted his head, ears slicing the air. His body coiled. "Easy," Anthony muttered, but even he felt his pulse spike. The spoon tipped. A faint pink streak slid down the metal. Buzz exploded forward. The scene unfolded in heartbeats. The bark like a thunderclap. Sophie's shriek, Naomi's wail, the crash of the spoon on the floor. Buzz's teeth clamped down on Sophie's forearm, not savage, but decisive, controlled. Anthony yanked him off, ordering the release. Buzz obeyed instantly. retreating but never looking away from the spoon. Sophie clutched her bleeding arm, screaming about the mad dog. Naomi sobbed. The kitchen smelled of cinnamon, fear, and iron. Later, when the ambulance pulled away and the animal control van loaded Buzz into its cage, Anthony's chest felt hollow, but one detail carved itself into his mind. Buzz had not looked at Sophie. He had not looked at Naomi. His eyes had been locked on the spoon lying on the tiles. Anthony picked it up after the chaos faded. A faint residue clung to the metal. The oatmeal smelled faintly wrong, an undercurrent metallic, bitter. His soldier's instinct flared. He wrapped the spoon in a napkin, tucked it into his pocket, and told no one. That night, alone at the table, he unwrapped it again. The smear caught the light like old rust. Buzz's eyes had said it all. There was a threat here. The past had trained Anthony to listen to instincts. The battlefield had taught him to trust his dog. Both whispered the same chilling truth. Sophie's mask was slipping, and whatever lay beneath it was dangerous. The next morning, the sun barely cleared the rooftops when Anthony drove the pickup across town to the quiet brick building that housed the regional forensic lab. He wasn't in uniform, but his bearing still screamed soldier. Shoulders squared, jaw tight, a man moving under the weight of purpose. Inside, Hannah Price, an old Army comrade now working as a toxicologist, met him with a frown. "What are you doing here at dawn, Cole?" she asked. He set the napkin on her stainless steel counter, unfolding it with deliberate care. The spoon gleamed under the fluorescent light, its surface streaked with faint pink residue. "I need you to run this. No questions until you do." His voice was low, clipped, but she heard the tremor beneath it. Hannah's brows knitted. She didn't argue. Hours later, she returned with a thin sheet of paper and eyes full of alarm. "Ethylene glycol," she said. "Antifreeze, lethal in small doses, especially for a child." The words landed like a detonation in Anthony's chest. Naomi's flushed cheeks the night before, her faint complaints of tummy pain, they weren't the innocent signs of a toddler's cold. His daughter had been poisoned, drop by drop, beneath his very roof. By the time he reached home, rage burned through him like fire in dry grass. He tore through Sophie's abandoned belongings, searching not as a father, but as a soldier, piecing together an enemy's pattern. In the lining of her bag, he found the notebook. Pages of uneven handwriting sprawled across it, frantic, unstable. "The child is different. The dog ruins everything. I have to fix it this time." Each line was a blade. Then, in a zipped pocket, he found an ID card. Not Sophie Blake at all. Marissa Hale. The name tickled memory, then slammed into place when he found the newspaper clipping folded at the bottom. Local woman convicted in neglect case. The grainy photo showed the same eyes that had smiled at him across his kitchen table. The air in the room thickened, pressing in on him. Naomi's giggle floated from the living room where she stacked blocks. Anthony gripped the counter, bile rising. A predator had lived under his roof, spoon-feeding poison to his child. And if not for Buzz, she might already be gone. He didn't hesitate. He called Erica Dunn, a detective he trusted from his police reserve days. Within the hour she arrived, tall and sharp-eyed, listening as Anthony laid out the spoon, the lab report, the notebook, the clipping. She swore softly, then nodded. "We'll put out an alert, but she's smart, Anthony. If she's already bolted, finding her won't be easy." That night, Naomi's pediatric tests confirmed the worst. Traces of the toxin had already strained her kidneys, The doctor's words were careful, clinical, but the undertone was brutal. She was on the edge of organ damage. Anthony sat in the sterile hospital room, his hands trembling as Naomi dozed. Buzz curled loyally at her bedside. Guilt gnawed at him. He, who had survived ambushes, raids, and firestorms overseas, had almost lost his daughter in the quiet safety of home. Days dragged like years. Officers canvassed bus stations, shelters, old addresses. Then came the call at 2 a.m. A neighbor's camera had caught a shadow near Anthony's backyard fence. Female, mid-30s, moving deliberately. Marissa had returned. Anthony was out the door before the dispatcher finished. Buzz leapt into the truck beside him, vibrating with a low growl as if he too smelled the storm ahead. Back at the house, moonlight washed the yard in pale silver. There she was, crouched near the porch steps, clutching a small glass vial that glinted in the dark. Her hair was wild, eyes fever bright. "You can't stop me," she hissed when he stepped into the yard. "The child belongs to me. I'll do it right this time." Buzz barked, a thunderous, earth-shaking sound. Anthony leveled his voice calm but steel-edged. "You're not touching her again." The next seconds blurred, Marissa lunging forward, the vial raised, Buzz surging like a bullet of fur and muscle. The struggle ended with officers swarming in, handcuffs snapping shut. Marissa shrieked, her words dissolving into incoherent cries. The vial shattered in the grass, hissing faintly. Naomi slept through it all, safe under Buzz's unyielding watch. That night marked the pivot of everything, the point where suspicion hardened into truth, where a quiet kitchen became a battlefield, and where Anthony finally understood that war did not always end overseas. Sometimes it found you at breakfast. The courthouse smelled faintly of polished wood and nerves. Reporters buzzed in the hallway, their whispers ricocheting off marble walls. Inside the chamber, Anthony sat with Naomi in his lap, her small hands clutching Buzz's collar, as though the dog were both anchor and shield. Across the aisle, Marissa Hale slouched in handcuffs. Her hair hung limp, her eyes hollow, but a defiant smirk still twitched at her lips, as if she believed the world might yet excuse her. The prosecutor laid out the case piece by piece. The toxicology report, the video from Anthony's camera, the manic scrawl in Marissa's journal. Each artifact landed like a hammer, stripping away any shadow of doubt. But the moment that silenced the room was when the judge permitted the recording to be played. The frantic audio of Buzz's bark, the crash of shattering glass, Marissa's own voice hissing, "The child belongs to me." Naomi whimpered and buried her face in Buzz's fur. The courtroom shifted, a collective realization sweeping over the onlookers. This wasn't just about poison or custody, it was about survival, and the unlikely sentinel who had refused to stay silent. When the verdict came, guilty on all counts, Marissa erupted, spewing broken phrases about saving the child, about fixing mistakes. Bailiffs dragged her away, her voice echoing until the heavy doors slammed shut. And then, for the first time in weeks, Anthony exhaled. Afterward, the town did something Anthony never expected. They gathered on the green in front of the Willow Bend courthouse, candles in hand, children on shoulders. The mayor himself stepped forward with a medal strung on a red ribbon for bravery, loyalty, and the saving of an innocent life, he declared before fastening it to Buzz's collar. The old shepherd stood tall, chest out, amber eyes scanning the crowd. When Naomi squealed with delight and wrapped her tiny arms around his neck, Buzz leaned into her, the metal clinking softly against her cheek. Anthony tried to smile, but tears blurred his vision. He remembered war zones, funerals, folded flags. He remembered the promise he made to his late wife on the day Naomi was born. She will never face the world alone. For a moment, he thought he had failed. But here was proof. Sometimes protection didn't come from a father's vigilance alone, but from the steadfast devotion of a comrade on four legs. That night, back in their kitchen, the world felt changed. Naomi sat in her high chair, swinging her feet, laughing at Buzz's playful attempts to steal bits of chicken. The shadows of fear had lifted, replaced by something fragile but real: hope. Anthony set down his fork and knelt beside Buzz, pressing his forehead to the dog's. "You saved us," he whispered, voice cracking. "You saved her." Buzz didn't answer in words, but his steady heartbeat against Anthony's palm said everything: loyalty, courage, love. For Anthony, the redemption wasn't just that Marissa would never hurt Naomi again. It was that he had been reminded, violently, painfully, that trust is never blind. It must be earned, tested, proven. And in the end, the one creature everyone doubted had seen the truth from the beginning. Naomi's laughter rang out again, filling the house like sunlight. For the first time in months, Anthony let himself believe that healing was not only possible, but already underway. Autumn arrived in Willow Bend with crisp mornings and trees aflame and gold. The town that once whispered about tragedy now spoke with pride of resilience, often pointing to the weathered shepherd trotting beside a little girl in pigtails. Anthony had traded sleepless nights for steady routines. He rose early, cooked pancakes shaped like stars for Naomi, and walked her to preschool with Buzz padding faithfully at her side. Other children rushed forward to pet the dog, their parents smiling knowingly. Buzz wasn't just a pet anymore. He had become a living legend, the guardian whose instincts had preserved a child's life. On Saturdays, Anthony and Naomi joined the community at the Veteran Center. Together, they planted a small garden in Buzz's honor, rows of lavender and rosemary that perfumed the air with calm. Naomi called it Buzz's Yard of Heroes, and whenever she watered the plants, Buzz sat proudly nearby, as though overseeing his own memorial while still very much alive. For Anthony, the healing was quieter, harder to measure. He found himself laughing again, a sound he hadn't recognized in years. He began fixing cars not just for income, but for neighbors in need, refusing payment from struggling families. The old soldier had discovered that service wasn't finished when the uniform came off. It simply took new forms. One evening, as the sun slid behind the hills, Naomi tugged at his sleeve. "Daddy, when I grow up, I want to help people like Buzz does." Her words struck him with a tender force. He lifted her onto his lap, gazing at the dog stretched out at their feet, the metal still shining faintly against his fur. "You already do," Anthony murmured. "Every time you smile, every time you laugh, you remind me what's worth fighting for." Buzz opened one eye as if agreeing, and so life moved forward, not free of scars, but richer for them. The nightmare had carved out space for something unexpected: gratitude, connection, renewal. Anthony no longer saw himself as a broken veteran, but as a father guided by love and anchored by a companion who had never stopped believing. On the mantel above their fireplace hung a single photograph: Naomi hugging Buzz, both bathed in sunlight, Anthony's hand resting gently on them. Beneath it was a plaque with simple words he had engraved himself: "Not all heroes wear medals. Some leave paw prints on our hearts.